this is Tanja, and today I'm going to share some money lessons from my 20s. You know, they say that hindsight is 2020, and when I look back at my financial journey over the years, I have recognized that one decade actually sets you up for the next. So the money decisions and the money habits that you create in your 20s are the ones that are going to pay off for you in your 30s. And the ones that you carry from your 30s, you reap the rewards of those in your 40s, and it goes on. So most of these are things that I was doing for myself as a financial person in my 20s. But as I look back, I can see that they are the ones that definitely worked for me, or those are the ones where I can say without a shadow of doubt that I needed in my 30s, and I was able to do whatever I did in my 30s because of the habits I had created in my 20s. So the first one, get a job, any job. And I know that while this may seem like very yesteryear to the Gen X persons or maybe even the millennials who are saying we're not going to just take any job, we're not going to just work for any company, we're not going to be exploited, we're not going to work long hours for little money, I'm going to say that unfortunately the commercial world has not advanced to that stage. And while it was thought that we would have been far more further in terms of working habits, we are not. I'm going to tell you, they lied. We are nowhere near where we thought we were going to be. If you're even of any category, whether or not you're a millennium, Gen Z, Gen X, or whatever, and as the old people would say, you know where your bread is buttered, and that is that your parents have provided for you, meaning you have a roof over your head, you have food in your fridge, and you don't have worries about where you're going to live or not being in a safe environment, then you do have options. For other persons, I'm going to say to you, get a job, any job. Many years ago, I would hear persons say, it's easier to get a job when you are already in a job than to get one if you are unemployed or at home. And I have proven that for myself. That's the reason why I always advocate to persons to take a job. You are more visible when you have a job. Even if that job is just covering your basics for now, it's something to grow on. You will be growing experience in which you can move on with. And if you keep your head down, I can assure you that the experience that you're gathering from that job is what will propel you to your next job. When I think of jobs, I always go back to 2006, and I think of myself in 2006. In 2006, I started the year in a job. That year, I was offered 4 jobs. Yes, and I'm speaking about substantial jobs, which also included the opportunity to move to Guernsey. I took about 3 out of the 4 of them. Yes, I had a lot of jobs in 2006, but the only way you're going to do that is if you're working on yourself, you're in a job, and people can see actually what you are doing. You will be rewarded for being a good employee, regardless of what that job is. So take a job. Number 2, invest in yourself. Personal development can come in 2 different forms. It can come in the form of soft skills, and it also come in the forms of additional tuition. So you may be at a point where you've now left university and there may be something else you want to do, like you want to go on to do your professional accountancy. That is personal development. It could also be a skill, nothing to do with academic, but in my 20s, I also spent a lot of time building other types of skills. If you've watched some of my other videos and maybe you've read my book, then you would hear me speak about the fact that I'm a trained beauty therapist. And I did that in my 20s. It's something that I was always interested in. There was a point in time where I thought it could be an avenue for extra income. Once I completed the course, I realized I didn't like doing it for other people, but I didn't mind doing it for myself. And I've saved thousands of dollars over the years because of that. You know, again, I speak about other skills that I've picked up since then. I've been to dressmaking classes. I've been to a whole bunch of other classes. And even if there's not like formal classes in terms of just picking up something that you've always wanted to do and to gain that skill. Your 20s is the time to do that. And in your 20s, you have time. There will be a point in time in your life, especially when you start to maybe raise a family or move up in your career, where you are not going to have the level of time that you have in your 20s to pursue the things that really matters to you, or to pursue hobbies and the things that you like. So I'm going to say to you, invest in yourself. Investing in yourself in your 20s mean that you are providing financially for yourself in your 30s and your 40s and for the rest of your life. And it comes in two forms. It comes in terms of upward mobility in your career. And I know that for a fact. Because if I looked at the starting salary at which I started at when I left university, and I looked at my salary, let's say 6 years down the road, which would have been right before I had actually went to Guernsey, my salary was 2.5 times bigger than when I left university. And that doesn't happen by accident. It happens by continuous development. So if you want to get that salary up to be able to support yourself as the years go by, you're going to have to put some time, effort, and also some money into developing your skills. Your 20s is the time for you to really start to hone your craft. And even if it's the case where you are still undecided about your career path, you can still pick up skills, because you never know where these skills are going to come in handy. Number 3, invest in your health. And this is one that a lot of us learn a little bit too late. This is one I probably hadn't learned in my 20s, but this is one that I definitely learned at an age where I didn't fall into a trap. And even though I said, I've always started to look after my mental health in my 20s, there was a point in time where I wasn't necessarily looking after my physical health to that same extent. And your physical health obviously is also just as important as your mental health, and your mental health is as important as your physical health. But why I'm going to say that this is important in your 20s is that you're creating habits. And if you haven't created that habit of how to look after your health, whether it's physical or mental, but let's focus on the physical now, when you start to get busy, you are not going to know how to incorporate a very healthy routine into busyness. How do I keep going to the gym, or how do I keep exercising, whatever exercise looks for you, whether it's tennis, whether it's golf, whether it's just walking? How are you going to continue to incorporate that in your 30s, in your 40s, in your 50s? And we know life is about habits, and we have to be able to create these habits in order for them to become part of who we are, for us to carry on. In your 20s is a time to really start to get into good habits. You may not have a lot of money, but you have time and you have things that you can do. So even if you don't have that money on a big gym membership, or you don't have that money to put to fancy gym clothes, you can still start to look after your health in many different ways. And as I said before, using the time that you have will be the secret to how you manage your 20s. If you don't spend the time managing your health in your 20s, you're going to spend a lot of money in your 30s, 40s, and especially in your 50s trying to catch back up on that health. Number 4, learn to live a debt-free life, or learn to live within your means. The 20s is not the time to rack up debt. I know that there are persons who may have student debt, and if you have student debt, we would hope that it's good student debt, meaning that you've done a course where you know that you can actually regain the monies that you have spent towards that during the time of your career. And if that is the case, then you would want to double down and make certain that you are keeping up with those student payments. And that may also be the reason why you should also take a job, to make certain that you don't fall behind if you have student debt. Outside of having student debt, you have to learn to live within your means. Even if it's a scenario where you have to be renting in your 20s, as I had done in my 20s. I moved out and I started to rent very early in my 20s. But at no point in time did I embrace debt. I think I'm from a generation where there was a point in time where debt wasn't available to me and persons older than I am, meaning that the banking institutions never wanted to lend us money. And because of that, we learn how to live without extra debt, without extra money, without bad loans. So when you've done that and you get to the point now where you do have access to all of these loans and free this and no down payment, then for me, it is just not attractive. So in my 20s, I lived within my means. It also means that I didn't necessarily have all the things that I wanted, or it didn't necessarily mean that I even had all the things that I need. It also meant that my housing situation wasn't ideal in many of the times, but it was what I could afford at the time, also while saving money. Because if you are spending your whole paycheck on your living expenses, meaning your travel, your accommodations, your housing, your food, your medical, and those type of scenarios, and then you have no money left back, then you're really not setting up yourself for your 30s. So you want to also make certain that your housing doesn't take up, let's say, 70% of your paycheck, because you know for a fact that you're above your allocations. I've also done another video if you are one of those persons on that end of the spectrum where your salary is probably like $2,500. I've done another video showing you how you can budget, and you can go watch that video to see exactly like where your percentages should be. And if you're following that percentage, then it means that you are not necessarily always going to be comfortable. So what I will say is that use that uncomfortable feeling to propel you to where you want to be. Or the more that you try to live outside or beyond your means, it means that you are really going to start to feel that in your 30s. So ignore the debt, live a debt-free life, learn to live within your means. And the next one, if you are going to learn to live within your means, you have to learn to budget. And I know I've said the dirty word again, and there are persons who are very eager to hear about financial stuff and personal finance and financial literacy, and they want to do better for themselves. And once they hear that word budget, it's like their brains spaz out. And they're like, no, I don't want to budget. I don't want to live on a budget. I don't make enough money to budget. And there are all these excuses. You are not going to succeed without a budget. You can live without a budget. You can probably not be broke without a budget. You are not going to financially succeed without a budget. You are not going to become financially independent. You are not going to see financial freedom, any of those things without a budget. Learn to budget. And it's very basic. This is what your income is. This is if you get paid per week, bi-weekly, or you get paid monthly. This is how much money you have coming in. This is how much money you have going out. It can be done at the back of an envelope, at the back of a napkin, whatever you have. Just write those numbers down and see where you are at. You know exactly where you're spending your money. You know how much money you have to go into the supermarket. You know how much money you have left back. You can start to build emergency funds and all of those kind of things, but you have to learn to budget. And in your 20s, if you didn't come from a financial background, even if you came from a financial background, because people seem to think that having financial knowledge means that you're going to be financially successful, and that is not the case. But even if you didn't have any financial knowledge at all, your 20s is the time that you really want to start to put those numbers on piece of paper, in an Excel spreadsheet, depending on your skill levels or whatever, and be able to say, this is how I'm going to spend my money. And that is what a budget is. Budget is not something that tries to restrain you from living life. A budget is a plan of where you're going to allocate your money. And number 6, once you've taken a job, you've done all of those things, you've learned to budget, you know where we're going next. Saving money. 20s, you can save money. You may not be able to save a whole big bag of money. You may not be able to save money with all these zeros, but you can save money. And in your 20s, you want to save whatever it is. Whether it's $100 a month, whether it's $500, $1,000 a month, whatever you can save in your 20s, save. Because if you realize what we're doing in our 20s, we're building habits. If you are saying, oh, I'm not making enough money now, I'm not out of university, or I've now gotten that first job and I just want to enjoy a little bit of life, I don't want to save my money, I just want to live, then when you get to your 30s, even if you're moving up in your career and now you have a bigger paycheck, you haven't yet learned to save money. So you're going to do that in your 30s, you're going to do that in your 40s, and chances are by the time you get mid 40 to late 40s to 50s, you're going to look up and you're going to say, oh shoot. Because you're going to realize, I do not know how to save money. These things are habits, and you have to get into good habits when you were young. Learn to save money in your 20s. $50, $100, it doesn't matter. So when you've done that budget will show you exactly what your residual income is. That is what monies you have left back after you've allocated everything to your expenses. And if it's a case where you don't have anything left back, then you need to go and see, okay, is there something else I can do? Or maybe do I need to pick up a little extra, little something coming on? Because remember, you're in your 20s, you have energy and you have time. And you see that thing called energy? I've now realized that energy is a commodity. So take it from me. Time is a commodity and energy is a commodity. You are not, unless you're living with a chronic illness, you are not going to ever have the amount of energy ever in life again that you have in your 20s. Utilize it well. So therefore, in your 20s, you're going to learn how to do these things, and you're going to learn how to save money, regardless of how little it is, because you're creating a habit for when you actually get that bigger paycheck. And if you haven't yet learned the skill of how to save money, when you get that bigger paycheck, you're still not going to be able to save anything, because lifestyle creep will prop in and you will be still in the same position as you were when you had the smaller paycheck. And the last lesson from my 20s, I would say make mistakes. And I don't know if this is one that I embraced a lot in my 20s, but as I said, hindsight is 2020. But I will say that your 20s is a time that you can experiment. And I guess I did experiment quite a bit in my 20s as well, because I think that was the time that I realized I didn't necessarily want to go down the same path that I had seen everyone who was probably in the financial world or accountants had gone down. And I did make a brave decision in my 20s where I decided to uproot, resign from my job and go to Trinidad just to get some extra help to pass my final exams. And when I did that, that was a move that I knew a lot of the older accountants were shocked about. There was some mumbling in the backgrounds, which nobody had actually said to me up front, about the fact that they felt it was a rash decision and a hard decision. But I'm going to say it's not one that I regret. And your 20s is a time where you do have a chance to be bold in some of the decisions that you're going to make, because you're young enough to recover. You're also young enough that it doesn't mentally affect you to that level, because remember, your 20s, you're kind of young and dumb. So there are things that you're going to do that may look like, oh, this isn't the right move, especially to older persons in your field, maybe even to your family and mentors and those type of persons. But at the end of the day, the 20s is your times that you can experiment. I'm not saying be stupid and make bad decisions, but I'm saying that it's the time that you can make a mistake and still recover, or it is the time that you can explore opportunities. If it is a case where you wanted to move to another country and those type of things, and persons are saying, oh, but you're at that point where you're so solid in your career. Do you really want to sit down in your 30s and 40s and then regret not making the choice? Or do you want to be able to sit back and say, I did it and it worked for me? And even if it was a case where it may not have worked out the way you wanted to, there's some kind of growth to get from it. So I would say your 20s, make some mistakes. Or even if you don't make the mistakes in your 20s, be bold in your decisions. The 20s is the time that you can do these things. You're trying to find who you are as a person. You're creating yourself in terms of your personal development. You're bringing on new skills that you didn't have before. And as I keep saying, you want to build those habits that go forward. And even in terms of making mistakes and recovering from them, you would find that there are many persons in their 30s or 40s who are so scared to settle into new paths, to even start a business on their own, and to do even things that I may think are basic things. And that is because they've never allowed themselves to step off the path at any point in time. And if you've not done that, when you get up in your 40s and your 50s and you suddenly decide to do something bold and brave, it's scary. But if you've developed these skills from the time in your 20s, it is not as scary. You'll be okay. They will be okay. Step out and be bold. I hope that these 7 tips that I've given of money lessons from my 20s, and I think from other persons' 20s who are financially thriving, I hope that they are useful to you. Even if you are past your 20s, I hope that they give you some insight and some inspiration to actually make certain that you are bold in how you're living, but at the same time that you're creating good habits for yourself that your future self will benefit from. Your 30s is where you will look back at and you will be able to see, I did this in my 20s and I'm now reaping the rewards. That pay increase that you're going to get, that advancement that you're going to get in your career, that job that you want, because it's probably going to take you until your 30s to really get the job that you want. It will all be because you've laid the groundwork in your 20s. So be brave and be bold.